Gunilla, you grew up in Sweden, and I note somewhere in something that you, in an interview that you had, that you mentioned that growing up in Sweden, in some respects, put you in touch with a nostalgia for the infinite. In fact, I think you said that it's typical of Swedes that they have a nostalgia for the infinite. I'm using that really as a premise because I'm wondering, if I ask the question, what caused you, what brought you into the thought of becoming an artist, or did you in fact have the thought of becoming an artist? Whether this notion or this, whether this sense of the infinite somehow played into this idea that you could be an artist. I say that because in some respects, art is often linked to thoughts such as the infinite and also such as nostalgia. I just wonder if either of these notions played into why you became an artist.
Well, if I think about myself, how I was when I was young, what kind of person I was and how my emotional state was, and my psychology and in relationship to other people, I know that I've always known that I am alone, and it's not because there aren't any other people. It's because I'm kind of part of another, I would say, realm, but it's just an emotional state, really. And I suppose there is nostalgia in that, in the sense that there is longing, and you never know what that longing is, and you don't. Well, when you're young, you think there's nostalgia there, but I'm not going back for it. I'll go forward with it, and then at some point, I started developing a need to do something with my hand, and which had to do with my brain, of course, and my emotional state. And that started early. I had no idea I was going to be that. I didn't know that was an artistic impulse then. I'm not even sure now that there is an artistic impulse, actually. But you know, some people with that inclination would start thinking about God, right? But it was not available for me. I did try it though. I was kind of religious when I was 15. I went through a period of religiousness and wanted to be confirmated, which is not that common in Sweden. And then the night before the confirmation, my parents discovered that I wasn't christened. So the priest called actually and said, your daughter can't be confirmed because she's not christened. So I had to be christened and confirmation at the same time. It became a big deal, and it became too social, and I think I couldn't be alone in that at all. So I kind of dropped that, and I never did find a God or whatever. So, but yes, so painting then, I was just using watercolor mostly, was satisfactory and gave me pleasure, but I didn't know why.
I'm reminded, just thinking about God, if we can just briefly return to God, something wonderful that Kierkegaard once mentioned, that if you wanted to understand God, if you wanted to understand the infinite, you should take a small boat and row out 2 kilometers into the ocean and look down. And he said, then you will understand the notion of the infinite.
Oh. Have you done that?
I haven't, but I cast myself back to my childhood, being in a small boat, not in the ocean, but in a lake, I guess, looking down and feeling a sense of, I guess, the infinite.
Yeah. It's a kind of almost like substitute depth. I think when you look down and you have this almost like vertigo, same feeling of swaying, and also I think the beauty of that experience would be related to infinity for me. And it's, today you can't really talk about beauty. You come into slippery waters at once, so it's not really anything I want to talk about here.
So do you think that there is a relationship between the notion of infinity and the practice of art? Is there a connection that would, in some respect, stitch the idea of what an artist does together between these two concepts, God notwithstanding, just the notion of the infinite? Any thoughts?
Well, Nostalgia of the Infinite is actually a book by Tarkovsky, so that brings me over to his practice, and he was religious, so that helped him, but so was Eisenstein. So, well, of course it is. I think. I mean, I don't know how to distinguish between existential longing, melancholy, sadness, and even joy. I mean, these are all emotional states, but it also involves psychology. And can I say that I am an artist I'm not an artist so that I can heal myself. I wouldn't say that. That's also not a good statement. But I think that all artists have thoughts that are longer in the sense, or are in states, can put themselves in states of mind and thought that, where this inquisitiveness kind of meets the longing, and then you it's a kind of research in a sense, but it's more, to me, it's an emotional research, a research into humanity and to understand who we are, and also what reality is. And I mean, this kind of maybe that feeds it's fed by those longer, lonely moments of asking yourself what it is. And I think the role of artists is always to try and explain what reality is, if not to ourselves, then that, if not to others, at least to ourselves. And it's the way to sort it out somehow.
In fact, you've mentioned, Gunilla, that central to your, and this is, I think, related to the more general question or abstract question of the role of the artist, but more personalized, that your encounter with the world was what drives you forward in your practice. Would I be mistaken in assembling that quotation in this context?
No, it's accurate for sure. The world around me informs me like everybody else. I look at it and I live in it, and then I don't know what triggers an idea or a thought. It could be a material. It could be a movement, or it could be music. I mean, all that is real. It can also be texture, and why it triggers something in me, I don't know. but it does, and I think that I'm just like everybody else there. I think that's not unusual, but maybe most people don't think that they need to do something with that. And sometimes that would be a relief. And I often talk to my partner about, or we talk about, why can we never just go into nature and lie down and sort of enjoy and fall asleep, have a nap, read a book, or go to the beach? No, it always involves like, what is it? Who are we? And you get no. I mean, it's not serene. I mean, it sounds like it could be serene to want to be in touch with eternity, but it's absolutely not serene. It's very intense most of the time.
On the question of intensity, and thinking about whether you're like everybody else, you've also mentioned that your aim is to disrupt norms, construct resistances to, or comment on the tyranny of orthodoxy. And I'm wondering if that demanding purpose would form the core to your practice.
Yeah, I formulated that over the years, and I think it's the core of my practice, and that has to do also with psychology and my past and my upbringing and how I see the world and what fails for us to be real and for other people to be real, and how a kind of cosmetic world, kind of cosmetics meaning that you have to be in a certain way, all the codes written on it in the laws, and civil codes are good, and they should be followed. But even there, it's not a given all the time. I see myself as a bit of a wild card. I think I would not see myself. My parents thought I was difficult, and that my imagination was an exaggeration that they kind of worried about. And they somehow connected to my left-handedness also, so I had to sit for a summer and learn to write with my right hand, which never happened after that. You touch on feminism there, because I think there are more rules, have been always, and is still more rules and the limitations for women how to move around in the world, for sure. And I have concentrated to some extent, or to a great extent, on women and the requirement of good behavior, or meaning look good. Very often live in this world of advertising and the ideal of a woman, and they lingering on our faces, especially in the film industry, where there is hardly a film, whether it's Tarkovsky or Godard or whoever, it is usually a woman's face is absolutely necessary. And it's irritating to see that they're always, to me they're similar, because they're even faces, and they're photogenic, and they're considering that historically that most men mostly make the films, it is kind of entertainment for the men, or for viewers. And I think that misbehavior is a lot more interesting than good behavior, and I think that I've always felt that way.
In fact, it's the world that's difficult, not yourself.
Well, if that's a strong thought, and I would like to. Yes, I do think that in some aspects, and that's why I work with this idea of coming to some kind of more naked truth, or naked statement of who I am, and with the help of performances and so on, and that we could come closer to each other that way. And I'm quite boring as a person, actually. I'm going to go to bed early, and I read, and I'm not I don't run around being weird or difficult. It's my work does, but not me.
Actually, I'd like you, if you would, to talk about a couple of works that, recent works, and they were in your recent exhibition at Rodman Hall. And I wonder if you'd mind talking about Plato to start with. Would you do that?
Yes. Visually, it's a very simple work. It's I filmed a very large, majestic ferry boat that runs between Stockholm and Helsinki, and I was on the shore and filming this boat moving forward, and of course that's a very kind of a short shoot. The problem was there from the beginning, and also I didn't think my camera was going to be good enough, which I was surprised to see that my little camera still holds up. But I knew from the beginning that I wanted that to become an eternal movement that would talk about isolation and going away, and Plato actually is not about Plato. It's abbreviation for please leave all tickets on board. And once you read that, you get a better idea of what that work is about. My mother was very close to dying at that time, and I did that work, and I also made a work where I was up in a hot air balloon in Stockholm. I had this need of movement. I'm not sure why. That's how it was. Is there anything else you wanted me to talk about in that work?
Well,
it's a one-liner. I love it. Sorry, it's a one-liner.
It may be a one-liner, but it's mesmerizing in the fact that the ship never leaves. The ship continues to float past us.
Yes.
In a kind of effortless sense of, shall I call it infinity? But
yes. You see, it's not always the artist who can explain the work. You did it much better than I did.
Perhaps you could explain the title.
Well, Plato is in there in the sense that I've always, in a simple way, understood Plato when he talks about the glimpse of light that we get from the grotto and looking up, and that's it for us. It's a pessimistic view, but it's also, it's true, and therefore it can be quite beautiful. And so this boat to me is the ever moving, or the entropy on the boat, and that's all we get, kind of. And then, you've given your ticket away, you're in there, and you're not going anywhere. Maybe it's a metaphor for life in some ways, maybe it's a metaphor for death. I'm not sure.
Perhaps a summary of the Republic.
Sorry?
Perhaps it's a summary of the Republic, Plato's Republic.
Aha! Well, that's a big step to take. Yeah.
Well, my step, not yours. So yes. I'll take responsibility.
Okay, you do that.
There's another work as well in that same exhibition, The Waiting Room, which is similarly intriguing. Can you talk about The Waiting Room? And I'm actually curious about the relationship between the sense of, I guess you could call it infinity. Certainly if you stay too long in the waiting room, you start to feel the notion of the infinite. And the Plato work, where again there's that mesmerizing quality of endlessness, I suppose you could call it. Do you want to talk about, but that's my premise, do you want to talk about The Waiting Room?
Yes, they're both white works. They are colorless, and that's that to me is a kind of unreality related to something that doesn't exist. And the waiting room is actually my latest part of a long series called the Hedda videos, and it's always the same performer, a Swedish friend of mine who's also an artist and who is my kind of alter ego. So she steps in for me. So I think on some level I have come to understand that this is a self-portrait in some pathetic way. And it's a very awkward situation where it's a play in 4 parts and nothing happens, just like on the boat. It just falls in on itself. And there's also entropy. And there's an effort, huge effort made by this person who we never see because her face is covered, and she has a white tutu which talks about the feminine, and she is fighting with a chair, and that chair is very difficult to move, but we all know that it isn't. But it's that kind of thing where that I like, that you as a viewer can be willing to suspend your disbelief because you see something that you were interested in, and that's why it's not. It doesn't even look like it's heavy, but at the same time, she behaves as if it's stuck. She's in the wrong place at the wrong time. She doesn't know where the stage is. The curtain keeps going up and down. When the applaud comes, which is just the word, applaud, she's halfway out of the scene, the mise en scène, but she doesn't know it. So it's very psychological, very loaded piece. I also find it slightly funny. I hope it is, because I hope it is a little funny, but maybe not. I don't know. She can be very funny, this performer. Anna-Lena Johansson is her name. And I made many works with her, and sometimes they're hilarious, but as I get older, I'm less and less funny. And I think this might be the last Hedda video, because it's just, that's it. It's entropy now. So. I know children love this piece from Rodman Hall. There was a school group there of to make theater, and they had emulated the costume and were filming themselves in front of my film. So there was something in there for children, that the bounciness maybe, or the costume, and also actually the costume is inspired by some of the modernist dance costumes in the 50s, which is who are those artists? Well, Picasso, but many others who made those outrageous costumes. And there is one costume that is, of course, much more professional and elegant. What I've made there is very, very, very pathetic. But it does have a place. Can you note? Yeah. I was very unsure about this work. I wasn't sure to show it, because I was thinking, well, how can anyone possibly see something there? But like I said, there's sometimes without you thinking, people will just sort of stay around and see something that maybe you don't see it either. So it's I guess it's relatively open, although I do call it entropy for myself, but it probably is quite open because there's no story, there's no words. I also I come into the scene myself once. I threw a plastic piece arrives on the stage and rolls around, and and I pick it up, and it's not anything it's a non-object. It has no meaning whatsoever. So it's also meaningless to come in and pick it up because it doesn't do anything. It's just a gesture of useless.
I think I heard you a few minutes ago, Gunilla, say that you sense a movement in your practice from at least playing the comedic to arriving at entropy.
Mm.
Do you want to follow that thought along a little bit more? If I may,
Yeah.
it strikes me that comedy requires a coherent field within which the comedic can operate.
Mm-hmm.
Once we verge to entropy, that field is dissipated.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure what we get, perhaps melancholy, I'm not sure. Anyway, just to suggest
Yeah.
that.
No, I know what you mean there. I think of Malevich, the Russian painter, who is one of my kind of ground figures in my work. I think he reached entropy quite early, and I don't know where he went from there, but he just perfected a cross, and no one else has been able to do anything like that at all. So that is entropy, because it never happened any other time. Yeah, well then at that time you could start talking about abstraction, what that is, and how that expression is a form of research, and then in a loss of form, and then maybe a loss of shape and loss of place. And maybe my work then, in some ways, it's interesting to think of the Hedda videos. There are maybe 15 of them now, I think, that they have gone from extremely lively, where people jump up and down on couches and gold, and they blow soap bubbles, and they're very, you know, there's body involved, and some of them are hilarious for some people, but they are serious to me. But they all have it. There's always a state of mind, and after there. And the last two, there's another of these Hedda videos in this show called The Last Dinner. I mean, my work does speak about the last of everything in this show. And the biggest work is called The Last Goodbye. The Big Goodbye, sorry. It's called The Big Goodbye. I realize it should be probably called The Last Goodbye, because my mother died shortly after that. And I knew she would. But in the other Hedda video, same performer, she is tilting a table that is ladled with dinnerware, all in green. And if you look closer, you realize it's not a dinner at all. It's just like objects, but it's very, very dinner-like, which is also pointed to the bourgeoisie a little bit, and she is very angry, and I can't say she, it's a creature that has mud in her face, and it looks kind of strange. You don't see much of her. So I've created a kind of hole in the middle of this video and folded it in on itself. And that's where all this dinnerware ends up, going into this middle, and it comes back up and then goes back in. That's really an image of entropy, actually, come to think of it. So those two last ones, I feel that that's it for me when it comes to that series. So it's an interesting way to think about it, actually.
What do you think about Samuel Beckett? Because as you talk, for some reason I think of Beckett's plays.
It's so evident to me. I forgot to. I don't even want, in some ways, to talk about it, because, of course, Waiting for Godot is one of my other big cornerstones in my practice. Strangely enough, it's very. I don't know if it's strange, but I just find it endlessly interesting that nothing happens, and at the same time, a lot happens. And I've seen it many times in different countries, in different languages. And I also took my daughter there to see it. She thought it was very cool. At a certain age, that's a very cool thing, as a kind of existentialism and all that stuff. And so she wanted to go to the theater, and we went. And after about half an hour, she turned to me and said, "But Mom, there's nothing here. So she was so disappointed. I didn't want to tell her anything because I just wanted her to have her own experience. Yes, that and also the Camus' The Stranger has guided me, and I've used that, the text from that Merceau character in some of my work, all related.
I'm kind of interested in when I first encountered your work, Gunilla, I understood you as working very materially in a sculptural practice or installational practice. Beautiful work. I remember writing about it because I was so struck by it.
Yes, you did, and I was very happy that you did.
And then, of course, you've shifted. I'm not say abandoned, but shifted your practice to what we could call a filmic practice, video, or very much about the projected image. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the shift from the one to the other.
Then my immediate thought is the work that you saw, which is a work of a bit more than 50 breastplates in latex, blackened and with white frogs and pearls on them, hung on the wall. And you wrote tragicomical, and that's something I was so struck by that, because I had no idea that that's how it could be read. I didn't feel that I could communicate well with that piece. I was fumbling there for a while. When I came to Canada, I was a painter, and I made a couple of big paintings when I arrived in Canada. And I was part of a collective called the Redhead, and I felt that there was no communication at all. I made very, very big paintings. They had 18 feet by 16 things. If I make them bigger, are they going to be better, and will they communicate better? But it just got worse. So I rolled up that, I still have it, I rolled that painting up and thought, I have to stop this is not working. And I had realized the power of television by then, and how used people are to the moving image. And I started looking at video. I'd never really thought about video because it used to be a really ugly medium, and it was just not beautiful, and it was overly political, overly politicized, which is not what I do. My work is always political. Like, I would say that if my work is any good, it's political, because there is no excuse to just make work that doesn't have a meaning in society itself, but it's hidden. Then I went over to do objects, and I had a very big studio, so everything got very big there too. That's why I made those 55 plates, and I was extremely ambitious for a while, trying to find a medium. I used wax a lot, and I had some success with it too. I was talking about Swedish textiles, ancient symbolic textiles, but that were used, for death and birth. So already the theme has always been there for me. A lot was black and white to that work. And then in my studio, everything grew there too, and got bigger and bigger, and the mice came and gnawed on the wax, and the latex rotted, and it just became overwhelming for me. To be honest, I just felt I'm going to have to close this shop too. So that's what I did, and I abandoned my studio, and then I decided to find another medium, and I was thinking about photography there a bit. But it happened at that very time that the first digital mini camcorder came out, was affordable, and so I bought one. And I got very interested in it, the versatility of this amazing instrument, and it's just it was like getting another arm, and then I made it work, and it was looked at and enjoyed by a lot of people, and it seemed so easy, and so I continued, and I'm still doing it. I was really in love with that camera, and it was very easy in the beginning. I wanted to think of video as something in a box, almost like a vitrine. I wanted to maintain this simple feeling of what children would say, what's in the box. And I always tried, and I still do, try to use my own filters, like it could be spit or raspberries, or filming through glass, which also Tarkovsky does in a beautiful way. I'm very influenced by his work, although I would never even say that I'm near what he does at all. Yeah, and then I got more interested in in film, and I started looking at Ingmar Bergman, who someone I wanted to look closely at and examine, which I've done in some of my work. And then my videos also became very big. It has happened again, that now I only want to make quite very big work, or I did. But now I'm at the end of a very long period of work. So now I'm thinking again about what I'm going to do now in the future.
One thing that strikes me about film or video, with respect to painting or even photography, and for sure sculpture and such, is the dimension of storytelling that is possible, made possible, through this particular medium, or these two mediums, film and video. Is it the storytelling aspect of it, or potential, even if it's not a literal story, is that you feel became so attractive?
Yes, I think so. I think it was a need to explain the world in a slightly more clear way, and to approach narrative somehow. I'm a real modernist in my head. I was brought up that way in Sweden, also educated that way, but I was happy to leave it. And when I came to Canada, I realized that people were just doing whatever they liked in film and video. So like narrative, it could be, well, it was a lot of narrative. And when this new wave came of video, of which I was part, I did make a couple of early, totally narrative-based works, but I wouldn't say narrative because they actually became anti-narratives before I ended my destruction of those narratives. I kind of, turned them around, and I called them kind of anti-films. And now I do. I'm interested in the face, and I've come to realize that now I feel that a face can also have a story, and I'm going closer and closer into trying to probe go inside people somehow with their faces, and some musicians I've worked with and so on. So that's my take on narrative. Is I'm against narrative in the sense that the film industry is always narrative. It's so tiring, and there's so many lousy stories. I mean, our lives are so endlessly more interesting than any of those films, I think, even on a small scale. And I need to work against narrative commercial film, of course. So it's quite political in that sense. And then we have the media world and the advertising here. So that's where the misbehavior comes in. Where if I film a woman or a person, they need to be very strange and not at all attractive. So they can never ever be seen as advertising.
I actually want to come back, this is backtracking a little bit, Gunilla, back to the question of events or circumstances that led you to think that art would be a possibility for you. And I seem to remember that you had relatives who were themselves artists, and this can be a powerful motive. Do you want to reflect on that a little bit?
Well, I come from a family that produced one of Sweden's most prominent painters, Josephson, and that was enough for. That's the Jewish part. My father was from a Jewish family, so that's. So when I grew up, this idea of being an artist was completely abstract to us. It's like you have professions, you have whatever you do, but you don't. Being an artist is not what our family does because we have one already, and and he's so great, so that you can't even touch on it. And it was also patriarchal and conservative family I grew up in, and it wasn't. It sounds crazy, but I don't think that my sister and I were especially encouraged to become artists. And for me, it was a question of I was led into academia and took a degree in social sciences and worked socially for a bit, which I think has helped me a lot for my practice. Actually, I think it's probably a good idea for artists to not go directly to art school, and that's very common in Sweden that you are in your 30s when you start art school, so that was so when I started having I had my lonely moments of nostalgia for the infinite. It had nothing to do with being an artist in the world, and it took me to move to Canada. Actually, my education is from Sweden, long education, but an MFA at the Stockholm University of Art and Design, and then I moved to Canada, and it's just I was so stunned by the openness of the at that time in the 80s of the art scene. The propositions were there, the approximations of all kinds, and modernism that I had in our school was kind of not in the picture, which was modernism to me is a male dominating field altogether. Even in what we grew up in, our buildings and in our teaching methods, everything was based on that. So coming here was when I forgot about my relative and liberated myself. But it wasn't in painting. It wasn't going to be in painting. It was going to be in another media, which I think was a great relief to my father. At least that was in painting. But what happened is that I've made a work now of the masterpiece of my relative is called Näcken, the Naked Man, and the Nix, the water nix. And I wanted to make that painting in video just for the hell of it, and for maybe repeating a certain history that I tell you about. So I went to Sweden and asked my cousin if he wanted to be Näcken, and he did. And then we couldn't find the waterfall, so we went to the archipelago and created our own waterfall with some people who were carrying buckets of water from the sea and pouring it behind Näcken. And my Näcken is an older person with a mustache and has very little to do. It's a very pathetic Näcken actually, and badly filmed, almost like I want to think it's purposely filmed badly, because the situation wasn't so good. But I've made 5 versions of this now, and I have submitted to many places. I've never shown it. But I'm very fond of it. And it was, I was close once to showing it in Sweden. But the painting by Josephson was refused in the Paris Spring Salon, and then he applied to, he donated or wanted to donate this painting, this big painting, to National Museum in Stockholm, and they refused it. So I applied to the Swedish Institute in Paris to show it, and they refused it. So now I'm going to donate it to National Museum and see what happens. So I'm amusing myself a bit with this piece.
That's a performance, if there ever was one.
That's true. Yes, my cousin was very happy to do it. He felt absolutely liberated, and it changed him, he felt. And many of the people I worked with, the same people almost all the time, are very good friends of mine, and they are always happy with the results, which is a gift, actually.
I have what might be a curious question, but I can't help myself asking it, Gunilla. You have a long relationship with Louis de Soto, another artist, though of course a writer and a painter. And I guess I'm struck by the fact that you have this relationship which branches between the visual arts and writing, novels, literature. I'm curious to what extent literature, and of course especially perhaps the discussions that you must have with Louis on literature, apart from lying in the grass and watching the clouds go by. I'm curious to what extent literature plays a part in your life.
It's important. Literature is important for me. Books are very important, and not often American or Canadian literature. Because I was already 38 when I came to Canada, my canon, literature canon, was then more European, Swedish, which is a very small market, but big enough for me. And it's very, very wonderful social realism literature, a school in Sweden of literature that's very, very important for me. I always read, and it's like that's another reality actually for me. I know dreams is another reality. That's a third level, but that's the one I like the least because it's you have no power over it whatsoever. It can be really difficult. But literature is there. It's not like life because it's just you can create the ending as you like. And the propositions for how to live and the characters and the people, humanity is in literature, of course, is extremely important. Much more important for me than film, actually. And there again, Louis and I have many discussions about narrative and linearity, and we are very different in the sense that my work is very experimental and his is not. He really believes in writing a clear literature that is simple, but of course high literature. And I don't know why I like his narratives, probably because I like him. But they don't have usually they have tragic endings. His books are sad also. We have similarities in our psyche.
Melancholy and
We are
color.
so friends, yes, melancholy.
I'd like to turn to the question related to how artists work in the world, Gunilla. And let's look at the question of the curatorial embrace, how an artist relates to the means by which work is disseminated through institutions, big or small. Do you have any thoughts about curating, or how curating has worked with respect to your work, and whatever reflections you might have on that?
It's a complex question for me, which I mean, a curator is a person, for me, that works in an institution usually, and who is choosing art for exhibitions in these institutions. It could be a hospital, it could be a school, or it could be a gallery or a museum. We actually, when I grew up, we had curators in our schools who also took care of our mental health if we had problems. So for me, a curator has a very, and I think it has many other meanings. And now, curator is the people who are now artists. That's the curator is the new artist, sort of. That's how it's become now. You know, if we're going to have curation like that, I think I would trust artists to be curators. I don't think I could. I'm not interested in curating at all myself, or I've never thought about it actually. But I think the kind of, they are part of the bureaucracy for me a bit, and they kind of stop you. They're there to stop you in the door. That's a bad thing to say. And they are sometimes pretty self-important and young, and don't know, from my point of view, enough history, art history, geography, whatever you need to know in order to sort of create big, enormous statements about other people's work. I mean, that's a very complex job. But it was especially one time a few years ago, I was sort of sitting with a group of people close to Gladstone, and I thought they were artists, but I understood eventually as talking. I didn't really know anybody, and I was listening. They were talking about over my head of some other place, other things, and it dawned on me, they're curators, and they're here to talk about that, and they just moved over here and there, and the places, and they kind of had a completely different discussion that was not about art, but about that, and it sounded almost like it could be about anything.
Once we pass the gatekeeper, and the work is available, we have the role of the critic. And I wonder what your thoughts are about criticism today, as you've experienced it, Gunilla.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to critics for art critics for daily newspapers and so on, it's I suppose they're there to report. They're more for talking about this work that would make people come in, and I don't see any reason why that would be a negative criticism, because that's wouldn't serve the purpose. In fact, I don't think that any art criticism, should have anything that would hurt the artist ever, because artists do everything we do is kind and doesn't hurt anybody. So I don't see any reason why we would be, or why we would be hurt by anybody. So I think if you don't like the work, don't write about it. And that could be, you could say, then you have the analytical writing is different, because then you've kind of surpassed the idea of criticism. And that's when it becomes really interesting, and I really, really like that kind of writing and that kind of critique. Haven't had many of those personally of myself, but a couple of catalogs with essays and so on, which I really like to read. And I have felt well understood the times it's happened. So I have a milder relationship to art critics than I have to curators. Because they are creators.
I'm going to throw another quote at you from yourself, Gunilla. The art market and the art star system bore me. And I'm kind of curious, leading on from that, what your thoughts are on the art system.
Well, the art star is easy to talk about because, I mean, it's boring to have any kind of star. There's superstars of any kind, superheroes or film stars. I mean, I find myself more interesting actually, and most of the people I know. So, I mean, I'm not saying this to be, I don't want to sound arrogant, but I think that this kind of phenomenon of art star is a modern phenomenon that has to do with money, and that are conspiracies between museums, galleries and writers actually often. So it's kind of a serious phenomenon in some ways. And there's far too much money involved there, and also what museums buy, and I'm not too trusting when it comes to the art systems. I'm not sure what kind of people are involved. I'm not sure about what kind of business it is, and I'm a little afraid of it, and I'm not very good with self-promotion in the sense that maybe I'm the cringing kind. Maybe I'm afraid of being hurt. Maybe I'm feel hopeless because I won't be understood on that scale. But I've been in some of these places, and I've won, the big institutions. So I've had shows there, and I've had very good experiences here in Canada from art institutions when I've had my shows. But how it is on the level of getting up there and having worked an entire life on something that is becoming very good, and at the same time not being considered as artist whose work you buy, the institution buys. I start to wonder what the motifs and who's involved, and tax reasons, and it's very. I find it. I wish I had a much more clear and more aggressive look on it. I sometimes feel like I'm not even professional because I can't handle that side, and it's always been male dominated for me in my life at my age now also, and very cliched, clicked and so on. It's hard to talk about because should be part of my practice, right? But it's a sore point because it's just starting from zero, from square one each time. I'm going to be 17 in a while, and it's like I'm still knocking on the door with my hat in my hand, and it will probably always be that way for me. I hope it changes. I hope artists take care of their own. I think that we have to stop having museums where you pay to go in and look at art. You have to open up these institutions to much more art, and they need to become like cathedrals of culture that's free for everybody, and we have to stop judging artists as good or bad. And I think society basically, like in Norway, should give us support artists, should be able to afford it, and it has been proved that it's possible. So you can argue that the granting system, which we probably won't talk about, is also part of that very kind of distrust. And having been in a couple of juries where I find it difficult to state my view because people are so sure about their choices, and sometimes I'm not sure if their motives are clean or not. Not sure. So I think in the future we'll have a world with much more art and but the question will always be quality, I suppose. But I want to kind of oppose it. It's hard to think about how you could do that. Like if you have an art salary, like in Norway, all you have to do is you have to show that you show. You have to have a list every year, and then you have to send in 1 or 2 works, and then so it goes year by year. But there's not a big requirement for it. It's not a huge salary. It's maybe like a pension, and then you also support artists in their studios. You can in Sweden you can create your own group, like 3 people, and then you apply for rent reduction, which is a system that's in place, and that should absolutely be in place here. The parallel system in Canada is the best in the world in many ways. So we haven't talked about that, but I don't know enough about it to really talk about that. I wasn't here when it was very important. I think it's a bit diluted now, isn't it? It's changing.
Well, of course, the whole system is evolving, and perhaps rather notable is if you think back to the 1970s when the parallel system was developed, artist run as it's now known, that at the time it seemed very much an avant-gardist gesture in what was, relatively speaking, a wilderness of art distribution. Now, of course, it's very different. Young artists are forming their own private galleries. And so the parallel system has diversified and expanded exponentially, you might say, to the point where it works around and with the official institutions, the long-standing official institutions. It's harder to talk about the parallel system any longer in and of itself because it has expanded so exponentially, and I think that this is certainly, I would say, a very positive development.
I would say that too. I mean, so there's a good story here, and maybe this is the only model that actually exists anywhere in the world that we know. So that's something that has been many people, including yourself, have been involved in starting and so on, which is a fantastic thing in Canada. And I'd heard about it before I moved here. And I have shown throughout the country in places like that. So that's where curators are also involved, but they are on that institutional level but also where seems to be a lot transparency in that system. I want to believe that it's not corrupt. It's always had transparency, which is comfortable to think about.
I have 2 last questions. The first is, it's always difficult to know how to define this, but I'm going to use a tried and true word. Do you think, or do you have a feeling that there's a zeitgeist at work that your work responds to? And I know that this is a difficult subject because one person's zeitgeist is different from another person's. So I guess I'm quite happy to hear personal response to the question of whether that you feel it was a common discourse or a dominant discourse or a discourse that seems in play that you feel your work most especially attaches itself to.
Yes, if we talk about zeitgeist as being a truthful kind of mirror of the contemporary art world, and not anything that has been formulated by gallery owners or art stars, then I think I'm quite comfortable in the world that way. And I often work with younger artists, and they seem to understand my work. So I think that's a sign of actually, I feel I'm more inside. I'm more in the zeitgeist now than I was earlier. When I did the same kind of work, but it was too weird, 20 years ago. It was just too strange. And now there are people, young artists today, who are making very strange work, and I'm very comfortable with that. And I like to see it. I like that development. There's much fear. I mean, you might not think this, but when I move around a bit in the world, also I see very strange expressions, and I'm interested. I like to see things I've never seen before, I suppose. And I make them too.
I'm always curious about this question of reality and what is real, to put it differently. What is substantial that we feel we know when we see it or experience it? And of course there's that wonderful antique word, authenticity, that was coined to attempt to give a name to this feeling, but the feeling probably extends much more than the word authenticity itself. But I'm curious whether, with yourself, whether this notion of what is real or authentic could be constituted in the subversive quality of transgression and revelation that you have cited as important to you. So the question, yes.
The authenticity that's not interesting in art to me. Authenticity is interesting in when people are authentic, when you can know each other. But in art, authenticity to me belongs to the old male-dominated art world for hundreds of years, and where authenticity has been questioned and talked about, and the value is really, the money comes into the picture when it comes to authenticity. I don't find that, I mean, I've remade my relative's neck, and that tells you enough about what I think of authenticity. It's like, I totally, broke it down. I like to subvert it, actually. I don't, yeah. But what was the first part of your question?
I'm curious about these two terms, transgression and revelation, and whether these words might suggest a channel by which we can understand something that is real.
Well, I think you have to investigate the world in order to find the truth. And of course, transgression and subversion are important in this research. They're like tools for carpentry, and I think it's very, very important. I'm not sure that was important until about 20 years ago. I'm not sure, and I think feminism has certainly pushed this forward, this questioning forward in a very healthy way, and I'm kind of proud to be part of it. And I kind of say to hell with authenticity, actually. Come to think of it. You can quote me anytime. Steal, cut my pieces away, take my drawings, whatever, I don't care.